Welcome, everyone, to the Astrology Squad. We're here to give you the astrological inside track on newsmakers, celebrities, historical figures. And by doing so, we hope to teach you about the planets and the zodiac signs so you can learn more about your own horoscope and also what astrology can and cannot offer. My name's Frank Clifford. I'm a full-time astrologer, writer, and teacher. I run the London School of Astrology, which offers courses online and in London as well. I'm delighted here to be here with my co-host, Richard Swatton, and our special guest, Stephanie James. Richard, please introduce yourself.
My name is Richard Swatton. I've been a professional astrologer since 1988, and I'm now on the team at the London School of Astrology, and very pleased to do so. I have an online YouTube channel which I occasionally give videos about astrology too, but my main profession is as a psychotherapist, and I try to get a balance between the two. I used to be a jazz pianist actually up till about 2002, but I found the lifestyle a little bit challenging to me, so I went full-time both in astrology and psychotherapy then.
Thanks, Richard. And welcome, Stephanie. Great to have you here. Tell us a bit about who you are.
I am a podcaster, the host of the Stellium Astrology podcast, and I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com. I used to be a student at the LSA, the London School of Astrology, and ever since I started there on Halloween in 2012, and then after staying for a few more years than originally planned, probably much to Frank's dismay, because I wouldn't leave. Frank's very kindly had me back to teach classes, and yes, I'm on the curriculum, aren't I? I'm on the online curriculum as well, and I've recently done a video for the Astrology Squad as well. So thank you for having me, Frank.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Richard, as well. Great to have you both. Today, we're looking at the essence of Virgo, and I'm sure we'll be looking at more with this chart. This is the chart of Michael Jackson, born the 29th of August, 1958. Our previous video was on Madonna, who was born just a week or so before. So it's a very interesting time in musical history, I guess, to be born in this month. Angela Bassett in the news as well was also a time twin of Madonna. I think Lenny Henry, the British comedian, is a time twin of Michael Jackson. So the 80s were full of people born in 1958, growing, developing. This chart, birth time, comes from the grandmother giving it to Michael Jackson's nephew. Over the years, we've had a lot of different birth times for Michael Jackson. 7:33 p.m. came up from him a while ago when he had a Vedic astrologer work for him, but it was contradicted by other statements, etc., and other people's rectifications of his chart. And luckily on Twitter some years ago, the nephew Taj, I think his name is, asked the grandmother, Catherine Jackson, Michael Jackson's mother, and she got the time from the birth certificate. So this is probably as good as it's going to get. And it gives Michael Jackson a sun in Virgo, of course, and the moon is in Pisces, as it was all day. But it gives him a Pisces ascendant, it gives him mutable angles. The 4 angles of the chart are in mutable signs, and puts an emphasis on the 6th house as well. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. And it's important, I think, with astrology to look at people's charts and understand, try to understand who they are, where they're coming from, their type of motivation, their type of energy. These days, the tendency is to cancel everyone, and I know even some places won't play Michael Jackson music anymore for all sorts of various reasons nowadays, but we learn so much from looking at a chart, from looking at it with astrological judgment rather than personal judgment as well. So I think this is what we're aiming to do today. So I hope you'll enjoy this. So I'm going to start with you, Stephanie, if I may. Like Madonna in the video that we recorded recently, we have a combination of the Leo and the Virgo. Is there anything that you want to say about, in terms of Michael Jackson's life, his charisma, his personality, and how that may be seen?
Well, I I don't know lots about Michael Jackson's life. I haven't studied him at great depth, but I do think that there was some element of being very self-critical, I think, with Michael Jackson. He certainly seemed to want to change the way he looked. And I think that somebody who does that, there's nothing wrong with the way that he looked, but there was obviously an issue that he had with himself growing up, that he just completely transformed his appearance. That's, I guess, one of the main things that I think that really is the most obvious when you look at him. Often when you see people that have done this to themselves, for me personally, when I look at that kind of change to the appearance, I often think that it says a lot about what's going on in that person's head, rather than necessarily about how they want to look to other people and present this image of themselves. They're actually presenting more of their psychological nature. And he happened to be born during the same Mercury retrograde period as Madonna, but Mercury had retrograded back to 25 Leo. And I think I'd made a note here. I think it turned direct. It was stationing direct at this point. So in 3 days' time, it turned direct. And what I find when Mercury has been retrograde and is stationing direct is that there tends to be a bit more of a backstory to this person's life that they're born into. We've all got a backstory. There's always a story about what's happened before we're born, but it seems to be quite key to what they're going to do with their future. And I looked at when Mercury actually made the conjunction with its natal position, when it finally turned direct, as in through progression. And I think at the time, I've written it down somewhere, I think he was about 7.47 years old. So let's say like 7 3/4 is when it actually returned to its natal position through progression. And at about the age of 7, I think they said in where was it now, 1966, I think in 1964 he joined the Jackson Brothers. So there was already this like performing band that was part, like, his family already had this thing going, and it was at that age that they decided to bring him into it. So I think an interesting family to be born into to start with. Interesting the kind of experiences he had from a very young age because of his life in the spotlight, whether it was propelled directly into the spotlight or if he did a lot of the groundwork first. Like a lot of musicians back in those days couldn't rely on social media and videos going viral. They just had to do a lot of hard work and have good connections. Definitely, I think probably exposed to a lot of controversial stuff from a younger age, so had a lot of more adult experiences, which is probably where the Mercury met up with the Sun-Pluto conjunction natally. He's definitely, I think, had a very interesting childhood, and by all accounts, it would have been quite intense, because I think his father had quite high expectations of him and his brothers. It was kind of those kind of career dads who, like, they're kind of manager dads. I think Beyonce has one. I think the Williams sisters have a kind of manager dad, and they are held to a level of expectation which is so intense. They have nothing, that they literally have to kind of refine and perform at their highest level. So I think there's a sense of real craftsmanship about that Sun-Pluto, fastidious attention to detail, and an interesting backstory that he was born into as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Richard, what's your feeling about Virgo and the essence of Virgo that you might want to share with us?
We did a bit of this with Madonna. I completely agree that the personality traits which stem from the sign are often fastidious. You might call them perfectionists, but I don't think it's perfectionism as such. It is to do with making things fit and functional. You see, if we take the basic pattern of Virgo, which you hinted at on the Madonna video, was about the crossover between Virgo and Libra. So Virgo could be seen as the perfection of the individual seed. Let's say it's a wheat seed, and it goes through all of those phases. It comes into existence, it takes a body in Libra and so on. It starts to bloom and so on. Anyway, it comes around, and in Virgo, you get the fully fledged wheat. It's grown into its completeness, which is what the functional quality of Virgo is to do, is to complete things. And to complete things, and also, I think it has something to do with the repair function. That if something isn't quite right, it's got to be. So Virgo sees this thing where it's out of place. It's a person that can see the faults in things and has this impulse to correct it or make it work or to repair it. So the functional quality of the instrument is made whole. So this fastidiousness is about and discrimination and analysis and the creation of skills or design, and he was an absolute perfectionist when it came to his performances. He would go over in time and time, every single movement, every single placement was gone over. So he was quite obsessed with getting things just right, getting things just right. So it's to do with being true to your individual nature, perhaps over fastidious, perfectionist, an eye and attention for detail. But as I say, I think it's to do with the sense that the Virgo wants to help things function to their fullest. And you could call that purity, but it's making things work to their ultimate potentials. This is why often Virgo connected to diet, connected to therapy, connected to making things work right. So I think this came out in the realm of performance for him. It's a very physical thing, and when we come up to the moon in Pisces, we can see it's, this is a full moon person, which has great expectations, maybe even parental expectations. 9 months by secondary progression before he was born, there's that full moon. And I agree with Stephanie completely. We might get into it later. I don't think that he was allowed to be a child. I think he was deprived of the sensitivity and care, emotional care that he was needing. This Saturn square moon, very, very powerful. This was a very sensitive, internalized, emotional person, but I think he was taken into the professional sphere, Saturn at the 10th, way too early, expected to perform, expected to make money for the family, a duty put upon him. And I think this squashed to a certain extent his extremely sensitive nature. This is a person without a real childhood, and yet probably a deep understanding that there was something very, very special about him. Often full moons have that. There's something ready to blossom, because there's such a tension between this, that word syzygy is an energy dynamic to make the most, to make the fullest out of what one has. But that's built upon I think a rather depriving childhood, a rather put upon childhood from certain authorities, maybe even to do with the father's sense of poverty. And this was a way out. I'm not saying he did anything wrong, but it had the effect, I think, in Michael Jackson, of never being loved enough, cared for enough, wanted enough for himself, just rather what he wants to do. And whenever you see a Saturn square, there's often been the imposition of some other larger authoritative force which squashes or compromises or constricts the person's own emotional nature. So that's, I know I'm expanding it out, but that's the sense of this chart. It's quite tragic, that.
Thank you.
It's almost as though he's been objectified since birth, isn't it? It's like, I'm just looking at that, as you were saying all of that, I was looking at the T-square with Chiron and Venus and apexing with Mars, and it's all falling in that second house, and it kind of feels like there's this sense of like servitude, and you're here to serve and to perform for others and to provide that Saturnian duty, but actually, you know, this Mars in Taurus in the second house, there's, you know, you're driving all your energy into doing that, but you kind of overlook your own personal worth. But at the same time, like you said, there's this conflict of understanding that you're special. It's probably like being born a royal. You are born into duty, and you know you have to do these jobs, but actually it's a privilege to be born into that position. You know, it's a conflict, a duality of that kind of privileged position.
But I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with that word servitude. Or service. It's often to do with Virgo, but a lot to do with the 6th house. It must find its functional purpose within the whole, and that is a spiritual duty of the 6th house. To do something which fits in. So you're a servant, and so a lot of 6th house planets often feel that they've had to do things for other people. You know, they've had to do the washing up, they've had to do that, and you can find it, especially if Uranus is there or something, you'd often find a rebellious spirit against doing the ordinary things in life.
Yes.
So servitude, yes, I completely agree with that. The other thing I just wanted to add, as you brought it in, is the great perfectionism of Uranus. Uranus has to do with the impulse that life is on an evolutionary journey, and it has to change. It has to create a kind of perfection of the whole, because Uranus is a sky god. He looks upon everybody and doesn't like his progeny. They're too ugly, so he bungs them back into the earth. Meanwhile, he's got this vision that everything should work and functional whole, and it's perfect geometric universe, and it can try to do that in the person. He had a lot of money, so it's something to do with his ideal Venus, his ideal performance, aesthetic performance, his ideal music. But this face of his, this I think that, as I say, there's this sense of trying to, didn't he also pale his skin somewhat, or try to get rid of the color? This is a deep rebellion against those things in himself which are less than perfect. I think he had an obsession with perfection, and this has something to do with his greatness as a performer and as an artist.
Yeah.
But I never saw him be angry, and I you know, whenever I saw, maybe he's got this nice Piscean gentle nature and everything else, but he was angry. You know, this Mars square stuff, Mars square Mercury, you know, but I don't think he ever found an outlet for that.
I know he had 2 voices.
Do you?
Yes, so you can, I think you can Google this now, but I remember hearing Liza Minnelli, who was a great friend of his, talk about him. And whenever he spoke with her, he was gentle, he was soft. She met the Pisces, the Virgo, the sensitive voice. And one day she picked up, well, she was married to David Guest, who was a promoter for Michael Jackson, and that's how they all got together. She picked up the extension in her apartment and heard somebody telling her husband exactly what he wanted in the upcoming performance, whatever. And she said, "Oh, sorry, who is this?" And all of a sudden, Michael went back to the gentle, soft voice. He went, "Oh, hi, Liza, it's me." And she said, "Michael, you are busted. I've never heard you speak like that before." Yeah. And so I think he was many different people. And I think he was incredibly powerful. He also felt victimized. He felt used and abused and accused, but also he was a powerful figure that knew what he wanted. He knew creatively. And I find this a lot with my clients and reading about creative people. They're often incredibly assertive about their gift, their desire for the product, because their name is on there. Ultimately, people don't say bad producer, they say bad artist in the album. If we come back to the 6th house and we look at Saturn up there on the MC in Sagittarius, this is really the chart of a workhorse.
Yes.
Been driven to work hard, to get the steps right, to get the routine right. And we can say that the Pisces moon, the Pisces ascendant here on this side, was the escape. Or at least with the work came a level of creativity, a level of imagination, a level of becoming somebody else. It would have been interesting to have seen him act, to go into something where he could have lost himself. I know he did a couple of movies, The Wiz, etc., but it would have been interesting to see him go further. Very incredibly driven. That Sun Pluto is a do or die. It's 100%, an all or nothing desire. And yes, it was focused at times on perfection. And as you mentioned, Richard, the Venus Uranus is that ideal, that perfect ideal. And I think he would look at somebody like Diana Ross and see the glamour and the perfection in her face. Well, Diana Ross will tell you she's a testament to makeup and great great lights and everything else. But I think the obsession with perfection and glamour and perhaps
uncorruptedness.
Right.
I think all this stuff to do with his, I believe, sincere love that he had for those people that he wanted to keep them uncorrupted in a way. Do you see me? Because there's a sense that he's been violated himself as a child. I think I don't want to go too much into the psychology of it all, but I think that has a lot to do. Again, we're back to that theme of Virgo, of retaining yourself, of not giving yourself away. But this moon in Pisces, I wonder whether his performances and the films and the videos and his music was a kind of like a mother to him, that when he was lost in all of that performance, that he could feel connected. It's a kind of there wasn't an outside mother so much as an inside mother. Do you see what I mean? So when he's doing his Pisces, he's comforting himself in a way. And we know that Pisces is the great protean shapeshifter of the zodiac and can be anything and mold itself to anyone. But I do find that discussion, sorry, your point about the two different voices very interesting, because he does have a Mars square Mercury, and this is and it's in Taurus. He can be blunt, he can be sharp, and especially if his artistic integrity and his concern as Mercury in Leo, which is very loyal to, Leo needs to be loyal to its own voice, its own creative expression. So I'm sure that behind the scenes here, he could have been pretty sharp with people.
I imagine with the Mercury Mars, he was often known as an angry dancer. I
didn't know that. I didn't hear.
And not just the dance, the moonwalk with Mercury retrograde, that would perhaps reflect the moonwalk, square Mars, and of course the moon rising. But my feeling, yes, the anger came out in the beat. If you ever watch him at work, you can hear him, the clicks and the beat. It's very Mercury Mars, and I think that's often how it came out. The Saturn on the MC in Sagittarius feels like this, as Stephanie said, being born into duty. It's a religious duty as well, being born as a Jehovah's Witness, where up until her 80s, his mother would still knock on people's doors, and he was required to do that too. It'd be quite an interesting thing to open your door to Michael Jackson and his mother, spreading the gospel, spreading the word. I think that Saturn up there, on his Saturn return, he moved away from the religion, interestingly, and was criticized for Thriller, the occult, etc., in the years leading up to that. But so the Saturn is, I think, very, very powerful in terms of the duty, the obligation. And I imagine the rest of the Jackson clan, these are not people that could go back and work in retail or get a quick job running a restaurant somewhere. There was a burden on all of them to remain successful, remain famous. And of course, we know that Michael and later his sister Janet were the true luminaries of the family that somehow caught the public eye, caught the interest, had the talent that could be converted commercially, had the sense to pick the right producers, etc. You know, there was something about the two of them that just went way beyond perhaps the sum of all the other parts in a way. And what I'm curious about from both of you, and maybe Stephanie will say something about this in a moment, is the Pisces side. Richard says, noted that Michael Jackson was born about 16 hours after the full moon, so he's a full moon baby. But we've got the Pisces moon square Saturn. We've also got the Pisces ascendant. What's your feeling about that, Stephanie?
Well, the Pisces, moon square Saturn, I think it was Liz Green that says that they're the architects of their own isolation. And I think that he was very isolated, actually, particularly in his adulthood as well. I think that obviously the more famous you are, the less genuine the relationships are in your life, unless you're incredibly lucky. Yeah. But I was watching a video of Michael Jackson, just so happened to be the other day, and I can't remember who was questioning him now. I don't think it was the Bashir interviews. I think it was something different. But they were talking about Michael Jackson and whether he felt it was okay to have young children, like to have sleepovers with young children there. And he was talking about it in one of his voices, very childlike, and saying, there's nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful. It's innocent. It's gorgeous. And, in the morning we wake up and we go in this hot air balloon and we go up into the sky. And I just watched him and I genuinely just felt this sense of like disconnection to reality. And there's obviously with the I'm not saying every Pisces moon is like this, but with the Pisces moon, there is this ability to really venture into nostalgia and into sort of dream time. And I think with Michael Jackson, part of maybe the allure of Michael Jackson is that he can draw people into his dreams with you. So like you can be watching him. I don't know. You don't even have to be a great fan of his, but to watch him dance and to listen to him sing, he's one of the true artists who has got genuine talent, I believe, anyway. It's like certain people that sing that you just cannot help but be completely encapsulated by their voices. And I think Beyonce is one for me, but Michael Jackson is another. Just there's nothing quite like his voice. It's very unique. But with that Pisces stuff, it's all disposited by his Neptune in the 8th house. And like you said, he broke away at his Saturn return and did things like Thriller and kind of dabbled with what would be, unforgivable to Jehovah's Witness, to his religion and where he kind of came from. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the 8th house in his chart, actually. There's a lot of, I think, part of that is to do with his own personal transformation through his appearance as well. And, like I said, it feels like there's a very deep psychology going on in there, something deep and psychological. And I think when I was looking at his Mercury and the way that it's moving back and then going to move back forward over his Pluto and his Sun as well, that kind of, I think with Madonna, I was talking about repression, but with Michael Jackson, it feels like it's regression. There's a sense of, with Madonna, it was like the return of the repressed and expressing that, repressed nature. But with Michael Jackson, there seems to be this perhaps an inability to express himself and to grow up because of the duty that was placed upon him. So there's this sense of regressive nature, and we meet this childlike, unnurtured child through the moon rising in Pisces, and this kind of sense that I don't know if I saw the adult Michael Jackson. I feel like I only ever saw a child in an adult's body. I don't really particularly feel like I ever, even when he dangled his baby over the balcony, it's the kind of thing that it's almost like not quite getting the gravity of the repercussions of that action. There's a sense of like just, and I don't want to call it unrealistic, but just it's not. I can't really think of how to articulate it, but there's just this sense of like optimism about everything, this childlike optimism that he had. And even when questioned about quite serious things, he never really connected with the gravity of it. I don't think it was quite I don't know, away with the fairies in a sense. But you know, like I said, he had a great talent, and he had this great I feel like Saturn on the midheaven, there's not just through the duty that was placed upon him, but also kind of like a guiding force. You know, his team that would have been around him probably helped him to make some of the wiser decisions that he made. He probably had a very good management team that he was able to afford, I would imagine, through the work that he did. And just going back, actually, just when you were talking about the sixth house and some of the things that stands for, I think originally it used to be known as the house of oppression as well. So when we were talking about, you know, his sixth house planets, it probably felt like, you know, a sense of oppressiveness about his duty and the things that he could do. He definitely couldn't go out and live a normal life. I personally would hate to not be able to just pop to the shops really quickly. One of the things I loved about moving to a new area was the fact that I was completely anonymous. Nobody knew me. I could walk down the road and I didn't have to worry about bumping into anyone. Not like I'm a celebrity, but, you know, it's just like that kind of freedom of anonymity. And he's never, ever he never really had that ever, you know. So just having a life where all eyes were on you constantly, and always kind of being known as part of the Jacksons, or, you know, then, you know, growing into that, there's a sense of escapism that he has to do very publicly as part of his personality, because he never really had that real sense of actual escape.
Right. Thank you, Stephanie. What does the Pisces say to you, Richard?
Well, I mentioned that before about the indulgence. You know, typical character traits are that there's an emotional satisfaction in dealing with the imagination, with art, with expressing the emotions in whatever way you can. And he expressed those through dance, through physicality, through, you know, a minuteness of detail, you know, and he got the drama with the Venus in Leo, of course. But what I was taken with what Stephanie said was this deeper element. The pattern of Virgo is, in fact, you know, the descent of Persephone into the underworld, and she's abducted. And therefore, she experiences a profound a violation of her innocence. She's kept innocent too long. She's kept in childhood too long. She doesn't know how to relate. So she is forced by the machinations of Venus. In mythology, it's Venus that says, look, I want this girl to carry on and mature as an individual, as an adult, right? And that means sexual initiation. I don't think that Jackson was ever initiated into adulthood. He was kept there in the world of fantasy. And perhaps this was certainly helpful to him emotionally. He could only live in that fantasy world, you know, and the sense of perfection and a loss of innocence. I think he had a very, very close rapport with the childlike mentality. Now, maybe that got mixed up with his sexual system, with this Venus, who knows? But I do think that there's a great sense here of rapport with children. This is why he was called the Peter Pan of pop. What's Peter Pan? It's the child that never grows up. It's the child that wants to fly. You know, you can see this. I mean, it was ridiculous, really, putting a baby over that. But it's as if, you know, gravity doesn't matter. You see, almost escaping from this Saturn. And I wanted to say it's one of the darker sides, actually, of the Jupiter-Neptune aspect. The Jupiter-Neptune aspect is what House Sportus used to call the wish-fulfilling aspect. It's a fantasy which is going to take you into realms of perfection. You know, Neptune is often the idyllic fantasy of a paradise, but it can only imagine, on Earth, you can't do it. I mean, Uranus is the ideal of a perfected universe and a perfected mankind, which we'll never attain. It doesn't stop us trying, of course. But this Neptune is to be taken into the clouds, this angelicness that you talked about, Steph. And if it takes hold, you can believe that your fantasy world is more real than the tangible adult world of going down and buying a bottle of milk and all that. And Virgo somewhere needs an ordinary existence. but he was pandered to. He had a lot of money. I think that in many ways he never came down. He was a Peter Pan of pop. He was up there. Neverland was the name of his, and there's this sense that he was taken up somewhere into fantasy, but the psychology still wants closeness, human warmth, validation of his own emotional sentiments. This is an exceptionally sensitive and emotional child in his psychology. Do you see? So I think all that stuff to do with children is a sense of trying to make childhood better. I know that's almost pap psychology, but I think he was seriously damaged in himself. Now we see the Chiron in the 12th opposed to Venus coming in there. The normal sense of sexual expression is somehow being taken into an idealistic world of Aquarius and perfectionism. One of the myths of Aquarius is actually the myth where Zeus comes down and steals the what's his name? I can't remember now. But it's the only myth in Roman Greek myth where Zeus is enamored by the sexual attraction to an adolescent. And there's something perfected, if you like. There's that border between coming to be a man and not being a child. It's in that borderland state that there is some attraction, deep emotional attraction to unify with it. And so I wouldn't like to particularly cast aspersions or anything like this, but there is some profound emotional, sexual, uninitiated person trying to express themselves rather innocently. And I think Stephanie is absolutely right. I don't think he really understood what this looks like to the outside world.
It's interesting as well. Neverland.
Sorry, yes, Neverland. That was the name of his.
But it's literally like never land.
Yes,
don't ever connect with the earth.
That's right. Never connect with the earth. Always be in this Aquarius,
yes,
Neptunian fantasy world. That's where we really live, and that's where we all should live. And then we can remain children ever after, which is what the Peter Pan story is about. Never landing. He didn't want to grow up. When he kissed, not Tinkerbell, I can't remember who it was, but when he kissed, it was like, oh no, she wants a relationship. Do you remember? And he flies away from that because it means he can't be a boy anymore. And I think this whole Peter Pan psychology was inherent in Michael Jackson and forced into it.
The innocence of Pisces and the knowingness of Sun Pluto, or the exposure to the seedier side of life, can be also very Sun Pluto. The loss of innocence.
That's exactly.
The rape of Persephone, as you say, the abduction of innocence, the abduction of his childhood.
Exactly.
Comes up very, very clearly. The other final thing I just wanted to add, you mentioned the Jupiter-Neptune, which of course is that powerful aspect happening in 1958, and with the children of that year. Of course, he becomes part of the 70s legend as Jupiter and Neptune come together in 1971, just after the Jackson 5 become this sensation. And then in 1984, they come together just as he's winning 8 Grammys, as he's winning the American Music Awards. He's becoming the legend. And you fast forward a few more of those cycles, and he dies on the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in 2009. So he's very entwined with this idea of big beliefs. And this is why he'll never die. His genius won't die. People will continue to play him and continue to be devoted to him. But it's the magic of that Neverland, never stop believing, never lose hope, the innocence that he represents for so many people as well. I think the Jupiter-Neptune speaks of that eternal belief, Neptune being eternal, Jupiter being that sense of if we can become somebody, if we dream big enough. And
can I just because I've just remembered, it's the myth of Ganymede, where Jupiter or Zeus sweeps up that divine innocence that he sees, that it's burgeoning sexuality, but it's boy, it's adolescent, it's not quite man, and Zeus sweeps up, is somehow enamored completely with this divine beauty, and he takes it into heaven as an aspect of heaven. You see, this Neverland, this, we don't want this boy to grow up because of the beauty involved in it, because of the innocence. We don't want them to go into that difficulty of real life. And this is the problem, as I say, of Virgo that we talked about with Madonna as well, not being penetrated by life, but when you're in life, you're forced to go through these different stages. And initiation, as I say, I think at the key to this, he was never initiated into being what life is really about. He was allowed to indulge, or this Jupiter Neptune, as you say. It doesn't surprise me that he came to his end when that was being. Did you say what was the transit?
Well, it was Jupiter Neptune conjunct in the sky for everybody, but again, he's the Jupiter Neptune figure for so many people. Born under it, achieved in the early 70s, in the mid 80s, and he just follows that path very, very strongly, I think. So I was just curious about that. But yes, maybe never initiated, because at the beginning it was the tyranny of work, Sun Pluto in Virgo, the 6th house. It was work, 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 and the escape was fantasy, ideals, music on his own terms. And in between there, perhaps the mundane life that Virgo craves was lost. The anonymity, the ability, as Stephanie says, to go shopping. He'd have to go in disguise, and then no one would ever behave normally with him.
Very Pisces, and I think you're bringing up of that phrase again, Stephanie. I can't remember, but the architect of your own isolation. I think it's a beautiful phrase, because you can be lost in your depression with that. You can be lost in your sense of oppression from other people and seek isolation away from it. And he would have sought that through the Piscean. That's where he would go, into fantasy land and imagination and a kind of divine innocence. Pisces has something about not being born about it. It's a creature of the sea. It's kind of half in. It's a Melusian. It's the myth of the Little Mermaid that wants to become a human, but actually is eventually drawn back into the sea because that's where they belong. I think there's a key to this chart on the angles.
Thank you.
Key to the story.
Thank you both. Really appreciate your time and your energy looking at that. So a big thank you for watching. Thanks to my co-host Richard Swatton and our special guest Stephanie James. You can find us on www.astrologysquad.com or back on YouTube, and get in touch if there are people that you want us to explore as well. We'll do our best. Thanks everyone. Thanks Stephanie. Thanks Richard.
Cheerio.
Bye.